Hello friends! Before we start, I want to give a warning that all stories on today's episode contain demonic encounters that may not be suitable for all viewers. The third story mentions self-harm. Please use the timestamps below if you want to skip any stories, and let's get started. In the late 1980s, as a curious teen, I became fascinated with the occult. As a child growing up in a religious household, my first exposure of occult themes came from the Bible. I always strained to understand my beliefs concerning the teachings of the church, and especially struggled with my own faith in God. After learning that demons were former angels who had rebelled against God, were cast down to earth, and could interact with humans, I came to the conclusion that the best way to prove to myself that God existed was to see if demons existed. There was no internet back then to explore my questions and sate my curiosity. Knowledge of the occult was hard to come by and had to be searched for in libraries and bookstores. I collected a small library of books about witchcraft and demonology. Looking back now, I realized how foolish I was. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into. I began reading these books and actively trying to invite demons into my life. I read out loud long strings of demonic names out of the books. I would cast spells and draw symbols on my walls and on the floor. Nothing happened. I had a few strange dreams, but that wasn't proof of anything. Then one day, I came across a paragraph that told me to get a full clove of garlic and stake it with a large iron nail to attract demonic power to a place. I did this and put the staked clove deep in my closet. The demons didn't come to me suddenly with a large fanfare. They came gradually, insidiously working their way into my life and psyche without me hardly noticing, until they were ready. I woke up more frequently with nightmares. I woke up sometimes listening intently because I could have sworn that what had awoken me was laughter or whispering. I passed these off as dreams. Sometimes I woke up paralyzed for a few seconds. I passed this off as sleep paralysis. I woke up sometimes with all my sheets on the floor, far from the bed. I awoke some nights thinking, was my bed just moving? I passed this off as restless sleep. Then one night, I woke up to watch my hand and arm shoot out from my side, grab the lamp on my night table, and threw it across the room with such force that I pulled my shoulder and the lamp practically exploded against the opposite wall. I sat in the dark, cradling my arm, wondering how I could do such a thing out of a dead sleep. A few nights later, I did the same thing with a new lamp, with the same arm. I had to wear a sling to restrict movement of the shoulder. A few nights later, it happened one more time, but I didn't grab the lamp. I tore the sling right off my neck. I thought these things were very strange, but I still proceeded to invite the demons. I was still not convinced. I became irritable and my family started to notice. I became lazy with my schoolwork, distant and withdrawn and argumentative. My parents thought I might be on drugs. I was brought to a psychologist who tested me for them and diagnosed me with depression. I told no one what I was up to, and over the time, the odd occurrences increased. Late one night, I awoke to the full moon shining on my face through a window. I debated mentioning this because it sounds so strange, but I began growling at the moon. I remember not thinking as myself. My thoughts were basic and primal. I began growling more ferociously until I was practically foaming at the mouth and snapping at the moon like a rabid animal. I eventually snapped out of it and wondered what I was doing. I didn't know it yet, but at this point the demons were ready to pounce. They felt they had weakened me enough and worn down the walls between worlds within my room enough to extract my soul from my body. These next recollections are the most vivid in my mind. One night I awoke and felt very strange. I felt jarring disjointedness. Then part of myself lifted out of my feet and then worked up my body until I was floating above the bed. It felt something like if you were to smoothly pull a piece of tape off of a flat surface. I was floating above my bed, and I was looking down on myself. I tried to move, but knew somehow that I would have to learn how. After being amazed at what was happening, I then felt that something grabbed me by my feet and started to violently shake me like a rag doll. I felt like a streamer being whipped back and forth. I saw one side of the room and then the other flash before my eyes. Something was trying to tear me away from a connection I still had to my body laying on the bed. I was terrified, and I knew that whatever was doing this to me succeeded, I would die. But the cord tying me to my body was too strong. They could not break it. They gave up and let go. I floated lazily up to the ceiling. I remember distinctly my cheek resting lightly against the ceiling of my room. I set my eyes on a specific imperfection on the ceiling I had studied many times from below, but it was now inches from my face. I remember thinking how it looked different from here. Suddenly, I was in the bed, looking up at the ceiling where I just was. I was taking deep breaths like I needed air. I still felt strange and was now paralyzed with fear. I felt my chest getting heavy. I took a deep breath, but that feeling stayed. Now I felt as if I was being pushed down, but did not feel any pressure in a specific place. It was as if some invisible weight had been draped over my torso and was getting heavier. I remember thinking that this is just a dream. There is no way any of this is happening. Then I heard a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. I heard the sound of the bed creaking. I was sinking into the bed, and the sound of the bed warping under the increasing weight was real. This was really happening. In a frenzy of fear, I burst out of the bed and ran out of the room and the house. I went to my sister's house, who lived next door, and woke her up to let me in. I was wide-eyed and hyperventilating. She eventually calmed me down and began asking questions. I did not tell her about what I had been doing and told her I saw a ghost. She laughed it off and told me to stay the night if I wanted to. I stayed, but I did not sleep again that night. By the next day, I knew what I had to do, so I went back to my house and up to my room. I quickly went into the closet, grabbed the clove of garlic with the staked nail, which was now black, and took it outside. My parents' house is made of stone, and I found the largest opening space of wall with no windows and threw the clove against the stone. It exploded against the wall like I had thrown a grenade. There was nothing left. I never found a piece of that clove or the nail. I threw all occult materials, objects, and books I had into the wood stove and burned them. I cleaned the symbols off the wall and furniture, and I never slept in that room again. I think the demonic entity had one chance, but failed. I have never experienced anything like that again. So, do I believe in God now? Surprisingly, I'm still not sure that I do, but I do know that there are absolutely malicious entities in this world, and if you invite them into your life, they will gladly come in. Ever since becoming a theist and converting to my religion a couple of years ago, I've been having frequent encounters with the unseen. It started with going back to my motherland, where magic is ubiquitous, along with supernatural encounters. All in all, I went from an atheist to a believer. That was when the encounters started. I'd be talking to someone in a dream, and suddenly their pupils or eyes would change, and their voice would deepen, which I later learned are the two biggest signs of demonic possession. Anytime I would go to sleep without saying a prayer for protection, I was attacked. When this happened, I underwent sleep paralysis and woke up fuming. I was at my breaking point, and I began to curse out this dark entity. I went into the kitchen, and my mom was there. The stove light was the only light on. We were both by the counter opposite of the stove. Suddenly, I heard a loud click, and everything went dark. My mom said, "Hey, why'd you turn it off? I'm still in here." Neither of us were near the stove, and the light switch requires a lot of pressure to switch off. For a long time, nothing else happened, until recently. A new activity I've undertaken is going near the woods at night. They're right by my place near the water I usually walk by, and I'm also an adrenaline junkie, so the feeling is just incredibly thrilling. However, my mom ended up having sleep paralysis the last 2 nights that I went. Whenever this happened, she started wailing and crying in her sleep, and someone had to wake her up. Before I found out what she'd seen, I was getting ready to go back into the woods. However, a tweet caught my eye. Someone tweeted about driving through the forest at night and seeing people with their faces upside down running through a field. Under it was the famous Reddit thread of a forest rescuer that talks about seeing stairs. A story I distinctly remembered reading was from someone who went up the stairs, whose grandfather told them that they used to appear as doors, and to never go up them if you see any. Once I was done reading, I asked my mom what she saw. Both nights, she saw a door, and behind the door was a faceless figure in a black cloak. Later, I found out that the place I ventured to on those 2 nights was once a mass grave where the Chinese used to bury their dead. Their bodies had at one point been exhumed. Moreover, there's a rowing club I was sitting right across from that's listed as one of the most haunted places in my city. However, I still felt the urge to go deeper. I wanted to go into the woods. The only reason I didn't was because my religion instructs us to stay away from trees and water past sunset, as that's where you'll find demonic entities, and I knew there would be no prayer to protect me from my stupidity. The last time this occurred was a week ago when I finished watching one of the most disturbing demonic movies I've ever seen. Right as I finished watching it, my mom's wailing started again. Why doesn't this demon attack me? Is it because I'm not scared and protected? The demon fascinates me, and I may seek it out since it continues to strengthen my faith. This is my first time speaking about this. When I was 13, I was in a really dark place, cutting, messing with Satanism, etc. I was always suspicious of the information out there on spirituality, so I never held what I knew to much truth. My family has always had their experiences and abilities. My mom was an empath who could dream about events that would eventually happen. My brother who could see and dream about spirits in the house. I never knew what my gift was, but my mom always warned me about messing with anything evil since I'm an energetic beacon. I didn't listen and got a Ouija board for Christmas. I was in a terrible depression and was all around the perfect feeding ground for hungry spirits. For a week, nothing was happening. I was playing alone and kept rushing the process and doing literally everything wrong. Eventually, I tried to actually follow the directions and call out. I waited for a second after doing this. The room got so cold. It sounded like I put AirPods in and put the noise-canceling option on and heard loud ringing. Suddenly, the planchette moved to yes. It was way more than I was prepared for, so I freaked out and closed the session without anything but okay, goodbye. That pissed the spirit off. It got so cold and the hair on my body immediately stood up. I looked in my mirror across the room and I see this goat-legged figure with wings and squinty eyes lurching towards me, open-armed. I ran out and tried to tell my father and stepmom what happened. They all laughed and said I was being ridiculous. The next few days, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was constantly crying and felt sick to my stomach. My father said he didn't believe in any of it, but still made me take the board home to my mother when I left. My mom immediately felt something off. I was too afraid to tell her the truth, so I kept it a secret. That entire week, we all had strange dreams about a woman with an unhinged jaw screaming over us with no sound coming out, waking up at the same time at night, and dogs running for me or hiding under the furniture when I entered the room. My mom threw so many things out of the house that had any sort of energy tied to it to get rid of the dark energy. After a fight about why I haven't eaten in a week, I fessed up and brought the board to them and explained everything. My mom wasn't mad, more relieved since she knew how to fix it. From there, she set up a safe environment to exorcise me, pour salt around me and the board, candles, holy water, the whole thing. Everyone left the house except for my stepdad and me. We both held our hands on the planchette, and the spirit was already going crazy, trying to move off the board, counting backwards, going to letters, all of it. He kept saying to leave our house and to leave me alone. Eventually, it stopped after doing this for 5 minutes. In the silence, waiting for a sign, my stomach loudly rumbled. I felt a type of hunger I never felt before, and devoured an entire large stuffed crust pizza. My stomach looked disgustingly bloated for my 13-year-old body. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 weeks, but since then, I never felt the same. My mom said the entire week she couldn't feel my presence, like I was muted. I've always wondered if it ate a part of me or if it still follows me around. Since that incident, I threw out all of my creepy things or anything that reminded me of the incident. I've converted to Wicca and have been consistently practicing purification rituals and clean energy practice. Still though, when I'm really depressed, I see a shadow figure in the corner of my eye or in the corner of a dark room. It could be my paranoia or something more sinister lurking in the shadows. 2 summers ago, when I was 15, I worked for a month as a camp counselor. Both camp counselors and campers were given code names to avoid any contact outside of the camp. I had a great time until the final week. The last week was a seniors girl week where girls ages 11 to 14 could attend. I had a cabin of 5 11 to 12-year-old girls. Some of the girls were homesick around bedtime, but were able to sleep with some positive reassurance. On the 3rd night, I was surprised when one of my most independent girls, Kyron, stood in front of me when I woke up. She said she thought there was something outside and she wanted to go home. I told her it was probably just an animal since deer and raccoons venture into the camp often. She went back to bed with more reassurance, and I didn't think much about it and went back to sleep. The next night, she stood in front of me again and said she had to go to the bathroom. I accompanied her since it was a bit of a walk from our cabin. Once we're in the light of the bathroom, it was pretty clear to me that she had wet herself. I asked her about it, and she said it was just an accident. I let her clean herself up and went to get one of the camp leaders to see what to do about her sleeping bag. My camp leader, Elmo, came to the bathroom and started to ask Kyron about her accident. Kyron answered that she was scared to move or get out of her sleeping bag. When Elmo asked what she was scared of, Kyron responded, "The man." Elmo asked which man she was referring to, and Kyron didn't know his name, but described him. Elmo asked if he was tall, but Kyron said no. He was average height, not nice, and a man, but not human. Through tears and a shaking voice, she said that he had been following her and her brother around for a long time. She told us that one day she was playing in the forest at her grandparents' house, and that's when she met him. He scared her, so she ran away from him, but he always followed her and was always with her when she slept away at different places. Elmo calmed Kyron down and got her new sheets and blankets. She told Kyron that our repair guy, Shank, was going to do some ghost busting for her in the morning and that everything would be okay. The next morning, I was in the break room for a counselor's meeting. I told a few of my friends about the night before. We laughed about it, shrugged it off, and vowed not to tell anyone else what the girl said. A counselor I wasn't close with, Ace, walked in and told us that late last night, 2 13-year-old girls from her cabin felt like something was following them, and they both ran and were crying when they came back to the cabin, and she had to calm them down. My friend group and I decided against telling Ace about my situation, since she is known to spread rumors, which we were trying to avoid. The rest of the day was completely normal, and after the campfire, Shank, who is also an ordained minister, invited Elmo, Kyron, and me into the kitchen as he blessed a big bag of salt for us. He was doing this as a comfort for Kyron and told me to be careful since he didn't like how the situation felt. I laughed and brushed him off since I didn't think this was a serious situation. We spread salt around the doorway and windows so the demon couldn't enter. Kyron pulled me aside before bedtime and looked up at me with the saddest face I have ever seen. She said, "Ink, this isn't going to work. I appreciate it a lot, but the demon likes salt. He's going to come for it." Our new demon friend likes salt? Then everything clicked for me on how dangerous this situation was, and I started having a panic attack. I tried to remain calm and told Kyron to try to get some rest. I went into the kitchen and tears started flooding down my face. I begged Shank to let me sleep in the break room and have one of the senior staff members supervise my cabin tonight. He hugged me as I cried and felt overwhelmed by terror. I never felt that way before or since. I knew deep down that something very bad was going to happen. Shank gave me another bag of blessed salt to keep with me. He told me to sleep in the cabin and that I needed to follow God's plans for me and protect the children. Back at the cabin, I clutched my flashlight and the bag of salt as I tried to sleep as horrific feelings of fear and death loomed over me. Around 2 or 3 a.m., all the sleeping girls in my cabin inhaled a deep breath and exhaled, "Yink," which is my code name. I whispered back, "Are you girls awake?" And no response. After a few minutes of being absolutely petrified, I heard their normal snoring and sleep shuffling sounds. After a while, I heard the screen door creak open and became alert immediately. Adrenaline was coursing through me as I looked at the door. I strived to see anything in the pitch blackness when I saw a black flash to my right. I looked over and saw this entirely black being lean over one of my girls on the bottom bunk across from me. I saw it reaching for the girl's face and immediately flicked my flashlight on while gripping the bag of salt. I said, "God loves me," repeatedly until the black mass darted towards the door. I believed the demon had left, but I was still on edge for the rest of the night. The next morning, I saw the door was still open and confirmed my experience that everything really happened. As soon as I saw the sunrise through my window, I darted to my good friend Marco's cabin to tell her what happened. Before I could tell her anything, she told me that she was woken up in the middle of the night by someone or something breathing heavily outside her window and next to her bed. Thinking it was a camper, she got up to check it out, but all she saw was a dark figure turning and going into the bushes. She brushed it off as a deer. As we walked to the bathroom for an early morning shower, I told her everything. After my shower, I calmed down from last night's terror. Marco and I headed to the break room, waiting for others to join us for the morning meeting when Ace walked in. Ace told us something that made my blood run cold. She said that around midnight she looked out her window before bed and saw a black figure leaning against the tree behind my cabin and looking into the window that was facing Kyron's bed. At this point, I told Ace everything. Ace never knew about what Kyron told Elmo or I, or my experience with the demon, and yet she had her own 2 experiences, with her girls being followed and seeing a dark figure look into my cabin. I felt comfortable talking about what happened to all the other counselors, since 2 of them had similar experiences. After I came home, I vowed never to go back to that camp. Fortunately, I felt safe and didn't believe the demon had followed me home. I told one of my friends who often has spiritual encounters and asked what he thought. His response gave me chills. He said the same night I had an encounter with the demon, a spirit revealed that I was in grave danger. He said he repeatedly prayed for me throughout the night. He felt a connection to me and knew something evil was going on. He was so shocked to hear my story and was convinced I encountered some kind of demon that had latched itself onto this girl. My experience still haunts me to this day. Unfortunately, since only code names were used, I don't have any updates with Kyron or her brother. All I can do and ask others to do is please pray for them. I really hope the demon isn't still following them and that they are finally free. It was 2008 and I had just graduated university. I had graduated without debt due to some pretty wise financial decisions, scholarships, and continuously working during summers. I live in Canada, so our tuition for post-secondary education is a lot less than in the United States. After graduation, I had enough saved up to spend 8 weeks backpacking across Europe. 4 weeks into the trip, my traveling partner and I were visiting the motherland of Scotland. My dad's family is 100% Scottish. We have been staying in Edinburgh and enjoyed all of the creepy, morbid history that we found there. About 4 days in, we decided to take a walking tour of some of the underground vaults that peppered the city under the foundations of a lot of the buildings. There we were brought into an old Wiccan temple that had a stone circle in the middle. This circle was a sealed portal to the nether realm where demons, ghosts, and other evil spirits could cross over into our plane. I stayed far away from it, but our tour guide, a practicing Wiccan himself, told me of a demon who did escape. A powerful one that would lay a curse on you if he tipped his hat at you when he passed. He described him as appearing in an all-white-tailed suit, complete with a large top hat and walking cane. But there is a catch. A powerful Wiccan priest had used a magic spell to reverse the demon's power. Now, if he were to tip his hat at you, instead of cursing you, it would either do nothing or bless you and your family, essentially turning his evil power to curse into one of good. So after that tour, as is tradition, we all headed over to an ancient pub that opened around 1780 and had some drinks. After a few drinks, my traveling partner decided to head back to the hotel early, while I stayed and chatted with a lovely local who very thoroughly outdrank me. It was about 11 p.m. and I was wandering the streets of the old city when I saw a man who looked very strange. He was dressed in all white. After having heard the story about the demon, I stopped. I was not completely drunk, as I have been walking for an hour or so to just explore the nightlife, so I was sure I was seeing straight. He fit the description all right. At first, I thought he was an actor, one that used the legend to scare tourists in hope of the thrill, or maybe make some money. But as he got closer, the feeling of dread, evil, and just wrongness washed over me. I backed away and to the side for a few steps as he got closer. Then he tipped his hat at me, taking it partly off to expose a pure white skull underneath. However, it was his face that is burned into my memory forever. He had no mouth, eyes, or ears, just smooth white skin like the color of his skull. But his most distinguishing feature was a huge beak-like nose protruding a good 4 inches from his face. It was like a plague doctor mask, featureless and terrifying. I remember gasping at the sight and nearly falling over. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked on true evil for the first time. Even though there were no eyes or mouth, I could feel the entity smile and stare at me as he walked by. I pressed myself against a wall and followed him until he just faded away into nothingness. 20 minutes had passed before I found my senses again. No one passing on the street seemed to notice me frozen in terror, but when I came to, I decided I had enough exploring and went right back to the hotel. That night, all I could see was that face, and I didn't sleep well for a couple of days. Now about the curse or blessing. I don't think it worked on me. I had enough encounters with dark beings before that their mojo doesn't seem to work on me, so maybe I was immune. My life is certainly pretty good, but there were a lot of hard times after that. That was my encounter with a demon, or at least an entity that claimed to be a demon. I didn't get haunted by it, and it didn't even speak to me, but to stare into its face and see the nothingness of pure evil just made me realize that if there is evil in this world walking the streets, then there must be good. Maybe one of these days I will share my encounter with an angel to offset the evil I encountered here. So if you are walking the streets of Edinburgh late at night, avoid people dressed in an all-white Victorian formal wear because you may just get the fright of your life. This next story is a bonus story that recounts the most extreme demonic possession in history. There are mentions of sexual assault and self-harm, so please skip the story if needed. This is the last story, so if you decide to skip it, thank you for listening to me today. I hope you have a great day and take care. Now for our final story. In early 1840, the Dittus family moved into their new worn-out apartment in the outskirts of Muttlingen. The Dittus family was made up of 2 brothers named Andreas and Hans, and 3 sisters named Katharina, Anna, and Gottliebin. Their parents had died at a young age, and the siblings were left to fend for themselves. As soon as they moved in, the family started hearing creaks, bangs, and shuffles from every nook and corner of the house, and it appeared as if their new house was trying to fall apart. When Gottliebin, a pious young woman, was praying at the table on their first day of their arrival, she had fits and fell down on the floor. Following this event, the young woman, known for her faithfulness and good behavior, started developing repulsive behavior. The woman, who was being liked and respected by the people of the town, was now widely disliked and avoided by them. But considering the fact that she was a struggling orphan who had been contracting one illness after another, not many eyebrows were raised about the sudden alteration in her personality. Parallelly, the eerie sounds of the family's apartment were starting to become omnipresent, and the family was doing their best to brush it under the carpet. In the autumn of 1841, Gottliebin met Blumhardt, the town pastor, and opened up to him for the first time. Blumhardt was a Lutheran theologian who had moved to Muttlingen in 1838. Although Gottliebin had been walking a great distance every week to attend his sermon for months, she hadn't disclosed anything to him until then. As the strangeness in the house was growing exponentially, Gottliebin finally decided to open up, but even then, she did not reveal too much to him. She just told him that she suffered nightly temptations and that they were getting worse with time. Not having many details to work with, Blumhardt found himself in a position where he couldn't help her despite wanting to. He reluctantly saw Gottliebin walk away. A few weeks later, Gottliebin and Blumhardt crossed paths again. Gottliebin contracted a deadly facial infection, and she was being attended to by medical doctors. Blumhardt visited the woman to pray for her. However, he was annoyed by her behavior, as every time she saw him, she would look to one side. Also, every time he prayed, she would unfold her otherwise folded hands. Blumhardt continued that she was a self-willed, self-righteous, and a spiritually proud person, and just like other people in the town, distanced himself from her. By April 1842, after Gottliebin fully recovered, Blumhardt started to show more interest in her case after 2 of her relatives came to him seeking advice. The events at the family's house had become so profound that they could no longer handle them. The eerie sounds were now so loud that the entire neighborhood could hear them. Also, Gottliebin started claiming that she saw the figure of a woman from the village who had died 2 years back, and she apparently stood in front of her bed holding a dead child in her arms. According to Gottliebin, this woman would often come towards her while repeatedly saying, "I want to be left alone," or "Give me paper and I won't come back." There would be shimmers of lights in her room, and the others in the apartment witnessed it. Hearing this made the pastor abandon his avoidance and help the young woman and her family. He told Gottliebin not to engage with the spirit, as he considered its intentions to be evil. Not long afterwards, a piece of paper was found under the bed of Gottliebin, and it was completely covered in soot. It had something written on it, but it was not legible. Right next to it were several coins wrapped in paper and also covered in soot. A couple of weeks later, a flickering light on the floor behind the stove revealed a lot of things that were buried in the house, including salt, chalk, bones, and more coins wrapped in paper. Assuming these were remnants of some black magic ritual, the pastor burned them, hoping for the strangeness to conclude, but it only escalated the darkness in the house. The sound of loud, heavy footsteps in the house commenced, and they never stopped even during the day. They got even worse when Gottliebin was all alone in the house, and she would find herself surrounded by the sound of heavy footsteps, and the tables around her would start shaking violently. To get a better understanding of the events in the house, and to make sure the family was not making it up, the pastor arranged for an investigation into the house. One evening, when the pastor had entered the living room and while the investigating team was scanning the house, he heard two distinct loud knocks coming from the bedroom in which Gottliebin lay on her bed. These knocks were followed by heavy bangs, and all of them seemed to be coming from the same place. Trying to halt the bangs, the pastor tried praying, but the moment he started praying, the windows in the room rattled, the chairs around Gottliebin leapt from the floor, and sand started raining down from the ceiling. The floorboards were removed to try and find the source of the bangs, and this paved way for the discovery of multiple other occult objects buried under the house. Scraps of paper, mysterious powders, small packages of money, and a pot that contained small bones mixed with mud were found under the floorboard of the house. The next day, after attending church, Gottliebin was found unconscious on her bed. The skin on her head and arms were glowing red, and she showed signs of suffocation. The doctor's best efforts to revive her not proving to be fruitful. However, the young woman got back to her senses on her own after half an hour. With her voice trembling, she whispered to the pastor that she had seen the dead woman again while returning home from church. According to her, the woman was waiting in the living room with her dead child in her arms, and her dark presence made her faint. With the eeriness in the house growing, along with the rumors in the town about the house, the pastor decided to move the family out of the apartment. He anticipated that distancing Gottliebin would resolve the situation and asked her not to return to the building. With the town's policemen put in charge of the empty house, the rumors around the house slowly started dying, and for the people of the town, this peculiar and dramatic case had concluded. But little did they know that what happened next was being kept a secret from them by Gottliebin and Blumhardt. The eerie bangs and footsteps followed Gottliebin to her new home, and in fact they became worse. The young woman started frequently experiencing violent convulsions, whose intensity and duration increased with time. She would often faint in front of Blumhardt and convulse so much that her arms and head seemed to be ripping apart on themselves. Foam would flow out of her mouth as she twisted her arms, turned her head, and lifted her body while unconscious. At times, this would last for hours, and the doctors who administered her were not able to stop it. On one instance, while Gottliebin woke up, she confessed that she had seen something demonic float in front of her eyes. One day, unable to see the young woman suffer, Blumhardt rushed towards her while she was having one of her terrifying episodes, folded her hands forcefully, and started praying. He whispered, "Fold your hands and pray." This made her come out of her episode, and the convulsions stopped. Blumhardt finally understood what he had to do. Every time she had an episode, Blumhardt prayed and the convulsions stopped. But every next time, the demonic presence returned with much greater energy, and at one point, the prayers no more worked. One day, while Blumhardt reached Gottliebin's bed, she was having one of these episodes. He noticed something new. She was making horrible faces, and it emitted extreme rage. For the first time, she was trying to attack him, and his prayers didn't work. Gottliebin's eyes rolled back, and she started chanting in a demonic voice. It was said that Gottliebin's body was hosting 14 demons, and they were being led by the spirit of the dead woman, whom she had been previously seeing. The woman was apparently a murderer that killed her 2 children and buried them in her field. She was also a dark magic practitioner, and this condemned her to a restless afterlife. She was forever bound to the devil, and she was determined to make Gottliebin suffer. The darkness attached to the young woman kept getting stronger with time, and at one point there were 425 separate demonic entities in her body, which further increased to 1,067. Gottliebin started hurting herself during her episodes. At one point, every time the pastor visited, he would find a new self-inflicted wound on her body. This included a bleeding nose, bleeding wounds on her chest, and strands of hair forcefully yanked out by herself. One night she was woken up from her sleep by a sharp pain in her neck. When she opened her eyes, she found a burning hand choking her. The hand magically disappeared, leaving behind liquid-filled blisters, which took more than 2 weeks to heal. Over time, the pastor started finding Gottliebin with her body swollen, and she would vomit out whole buckets of water. She started suffering painful and strong hemorrhages after being assaulted by spirit-like figures, and on multiple occasions, she was found on her bed swimming in her own blood. Not being able to bear the ordeal, the young woman tried killing herself, but the evil entities inside her did not let her do it. The pastor, however, kept working day and night and successfully relieved her of multiple demons every day. From February of 1842, Gottliebin started vomiting strange things. This started with small pieces of glass and progressed to small pieces of iron. On different occasions, she started vomiting multiple nails together, huge shoe buckles, uncountable quantities of pins, lengths of wires, and knitting needles. It is said that even small living animals like bats, frogs, and locusts came out of her mouth. During the final period of her possession, the demonic entities in her body started to possess her sister Katharina and her brother Hans. In a possessed state, Katharina shouted in a rage that she would cut Blumhardt into 1,000 pieces. She had to be restrained because of her violent actions. While restrained, she shook her body so hard that it appeared as if she wanted to tear her body apart. Gottliebin confessed that she was exposed to magic when it was used to heal her illness while she was young. The instance which is linked to her possession, however, happened when she visited her cousin when she was 7. Her cousin, who was apparently evil, somehow pledged the poor girl's soul to the devil, and she was cursed with everlasting illness. Thank you, friends, for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's stories, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be alerted to future content. If you have a story you would like me to read, feel free to email me your submission for a chance to hear your story on a future episode. If you would like to support me, please join my channel for bonus and members-only content. Thank you again, friends, for your love and support. Until next time, take care.